And you're live whenever you're ready.
So I'm going to start officially talking right at noon, y'all. And here we are at noon. So wonderful. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Cristina Contreras Fox. I'm the Senior Policy Analyst at the Rhode Island Coalition to End Homelessness, and my pronouns are she, her.
My name is Yanin Castella. I am the newest addition to the Coalition to End Homelessness. I'm a community organizer. My pronouns are she, her, hers.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much to everybody for joining us today for the 2021 RIGA Wrap Up legislative session in review. This is a really fun, wonky time if you are somebody who is interested in homelessness and housing policy, if you're interested in learning more about how bills become laws, if you're interested more in Rhode Island politics. So with that, I see some people in the waiting room who I'm going to admit. I'm going to share my screen. If I can find it, here we go, perfect. And then one last piece before we start is, hold on. I'm trying to, excuse me all, I apologize. Let me stop sharing for a second because I want to make sure that we get this all recorded. So this is being recorded now. So if you want to send this to anyone who missed out, by all means, we'll be sending this to everybody afterwards. All right, excellent. So now I'm going to share my screen again. Perfecto. And if I could, full screen mode. There we are. Thanks everybody for being so kind with my 30-something self getting this all set up. So, but before we roll into the meat and potatoes of our time today, I just want to share some friendly reminders about web etiquette. So we have a lot to get through today, but I'm encouraging all of you to please introduce yourself in the chat, your name, your organization, if you are representing an organization, your pronouns, and then something that you're passionate about that was passed this year in the legislative session, or something that you want to see our General Assembly members take up next year. This is also in the chat, a place where you can ask questions, share links, talk and communicate with your other attendees. There will be space for questions towards the end, but like I said, we got a lot to go on. We got a lot to go into. If you can, please keep yourself on mute. And if you could also keep your camera off, that just makes things a little bit easier, a little bit smoother. And then just be kind to one another, right? We're all friends here. We're all political family. So with that, number one, so what did we do what we do? Why did we do it? I know a lot of the folks who are coming in right now. I know a lot of the folks who have registered, and I'm assuming a lot of the folks who are probably tuning in right now over Facebook and YouTube know very well we have a homelessness crisis and we have a housing crisis in Rhode Island. On any given night, there are 1,267 of our neighbors who will experience homelessness. Over 350 of them will experience chronic homelessness, excuse me, and those numbers are on the rise. Homelessness is on the rise in our state, chronic homelessness is on the rise, but what is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking is our housing stock, and in particular, our stock of safe, secure, affordable housing for no income, low income, and moderate income folks. So we know that this is an issue. We know that this is at the heart of the problem. We know that this is a root cause, but another thing that we know and we always need to be mindful of, and you're going to hear this come through in my remarks as I'm talking, and Janine too, but systemic racism is a root cause of homelessness. So to take a bit of a step back, The Rhode Island Coalition to End Homelessness envisions a state where no one experiences homelessness. We engage in policy and legislative advocacy because we know that in order to end homelessness, we need to achieve systemic change. And that change can only happen at the policy level, in legislation, in statute, et cetera, because we didn't get here overnight, right? You have to be making over $20 an hour, over $21 an hour, just to be able to afford a 2-bedroom at fair market rate here in Rhode Island. There's literally no place in our state where a minimum wage worker can afford to rent, can afford to buy a home. I mean, even people who are making $100,000 a year are struggling to buy a home. There are still over a dozen municipalities where if you're making 100K, you still can't afford a mortgage. And of course, those are the municipalities that have excellent public school systems and great green spaces and excellent city services, municipal services, right? So we didn't get into this situation overnight. We got here as a result of decades and decades of centuries, really, of inherently bigoted, racist policies. And systemic racism is something that hurts the entire community. Obviously, it harms and causes generational harm to Black and Indigenous Rhode Islanders of color. And that comes through in housing brutally and more clearly than many other places. And I think that's really saying something. So we need to make sure that the policies that we're advocating for are always centered in racial equity and justice. It can't just be fun buzzwords on a slide deck, right? These policies that we advance need to undo the decades of harm that have been done, that have created this ultimately inequitable and unjust system. So things are pretty bad right now, right? But change is possible and change has happened. And I'm excited to tell all of you about how that change happened. And a lot of people who are on this event right now were a fundamental part of that. And thank you so much for everything that you've done. But I want to talk first a little bit about how did we know what the problem is. How did we arrive at our plan, our strategy to change these, to address these? So number one, so I firmly believe, and this is shared by my colleagues, the function of the Coalition to End Homelessness in policy and legislative advocacy spaces is to always be the bridge that connects people making policy, those decision makers, with people who are impacted by policy, with people who have lived it. And of course, I mean, ultimately, those two folks should be one and the same. And I think now in the General Assembly, we have people who share their stories about experiencing homelessness, about experiencing housing insecurity. I mean, there certainly have been champions in there who have been doing this for decades, but we're seeing more and more folks running because they care about this so deeply and they want to personally impact the issue, right? But that is so important, because if we are not doing that, then policy gets made in a vacuum, and policy that's made in a vacuum is not real. It doesn't actually help people. So back in, I think it was, oh my gosh, I think it was 2019 or 2020, time is a little meaningless these days, right? We knew that we had some tough fights before us at the General Assembly. We had issues that we needed to impact, and we needed to figure out our plan. You need to know what people need, ask them. And so we sent out a survey encouraging folks to tell us, to give us their feedback. I mean, we sent out a survey, we had some community events, reached out to folks, got some one-on-one feedback, which was excellent. But one of the most important questions, at least to me in there, was the following issues of the things that are present in our state, of the problems that we have, the issues that are important. What do you think should be the top 3 that we prioritize for our legislative agenda? And you could see here the responses. We had over 70 people respond, and the top, I mean, you can see these were important. All of these things were very important to folks, but the things that really stood out, number 1, consistent funding for affordable housing production and preservation in the budget. Rhode Island has virtually no housing stock for folks who are no income, extremely low income, low and moderate income. And one of the biggest issues with that is because unlike up until this session, unlike all of our neighbors around us, unlike many other states, we had no consistent funding within our budget to build houses. And that's what we need, right? So for every 100 extremely low income families, currently in Rhode Island, there are only 51 affordable and available homes. So that means at the end of the day, there are 49 families, 49 households that will not have a place to live because it literally doesn't exist, right? You can't make $1 out of 15 cents. You can't house people when there are, or you can't expect people to find housing when there is no housing to be had, right? So this was a big, big issue that people were very clear and adamant, community members were very clear and adamant, we need this in Rhode Island. Other issues that came up, removing barriers to accessing housing, and then expansion of permanent supportive housing. So for those who are not familiar with what permanent supportive housing is, this is an intervention that is specifically targeted to folks who are experiencing chronic homelessness, meaning that they've experienced homelessness for a year or longer. They also have a disabling condition, like a physical disability or a mental health challenge or a substance use issue, excuse me. And so permanent supportive housing, that voucher provides permanent, affordable, safe, secure housing with wraparound community-based services and supports. And also permanent supportive housing operates under the Housing First model, which is it is what it says it is, housing first, keys first. The old models used to be, right, well, you have this home, we have services for you, but if you show up and you say that you want to you abuse alcohol. So if you show up drunk, or if you miss a case management appointment, if you do this, et cetera, if you don't meet all these conditions, you're going to lose your housing, which is not a very strong or stable path to give somebody who needs a strong and stable path, who needs that support, right? Permanent supportive housing says, here's your home, here are your keys, here are all the resources and services available to you, here are the people who are here to help you out. It's your choice whether you engage in this or not. And permanent supportive housing across the board, the evidence base, which just means we know that it works, which the proof that shows it works, the evidence base demonstrates an up to 90% reduction in shelter days overall, a 50% reduction in days experiencing homelessness. And there are also enormous reductions in hospital visits, days spent incarcerated. I mean, this is an incredible resource, an incredible intervention, and it's one that we need more of in Rhode Island. And the people certainly spoke here that this is something that we want to see. So we knew that this is what folks needed. These are the things that people wanted to see the Coalition to End Homelessness focus on. And so we took this information and worked with incredible community partners like Homes RI, homesri.org. If you haven't signed up for this newsletter yet, or if you haven't started following them yet, highly encourage it. They're an incredible collaborative of over 40 organizations that works together to increase the supply of safe and healthy housing in Rhode Island. But we worked with them. We worked with Champions and Friends in the General Assembly. We worked with everybody, right? Because it takes all of us working together to advocate and ultimately win these important policy changes to see, okay, what bills are being introduced, because we're not alone in this movement, right? What are we doing overall, and how does this fit into all of the work that we're doing so we can be as strong as possible in our advocacy, excuse me, and our lobbying, right? Our persuading of legislators to vote for the things that we need them to vote for. So we did that, and wrong way. Excuse me. It's all over, everybody. But here is the legislative agenda that we had, essentially. So I'm going to go through this in a couple ways. I'm going to bounce around a little bit, one bucket, then another, not from left to right. So just bear with me. So number one, we said that dedicated funds for affordable housing was one of, if not the top priority that we knew we needed, right? We need more housing in this state. We need more building. We need more maintaining. We need the monies to get that done. It needs to be consistent. We can't just, passing a housing bond is incredible and it is so, so, so important, but elections only happen typically every couple of years, right? We needed something more consistent. So we did support the $65 million housing bond for affordable housing production and community revitalization. We also supported, along with many folks in the community, many of our community and coalition partners, a dedicated funding stream for the production and preservation of affordable housing. Then I'll just zero in on these buckets one-on-one. So these two pieces were a 1-2 package for us. We knew that we needed to increase the amount of per capita spending on affordable housing in Rhode Island overall before this bond. If this bond hadn't have passed, our per capita spending as a state would have dropped to something like $5. Meanwhile, Massachusetts, like for contrast, Massachusetts spends over 100, Connecticut spends about 100. Vermont, I think, spends about 70. Even Maine spent more than us. I think they're spending around like 40 or 50. So this is something that we needed. If we had, we need more than a life raft, right? But if you take a life raft away from somebody in the ocean, what happens to them? So we couldn't let that happen, right? We also supported the dedicated funding stream in the budget. And this is a historic moment in our state. This is literally the first dedicated production fund for affordable housing in the history of Rhode Island. And this is absolutely critical because, like I said, we need that consistent, reliable funding. We just need there to always be houses going up, right? Houses being built, and the housing stock that we have, which is literally the third oldest in the country, is always being maintained. Excuse me. So the way that these came through, question 3 was obviously on the ballot in a special election. The way that the funding stream ended up, and this is where I want to give a little bit of detail into how the sausage gets made, essentially. So we supported bills that were introduced by Representative June Speakman, which was H5687, and Senator Megan Coleman, which was S365, the sub-A of which did pass in the Senate, which is tremendously exciting. But we found so our General Assembly, for those who don't know, is part-time, right? We're in session from January to June, usually Tuesdays through Thursdays, although this year our General Assembly was incredibly busy and did a lot of work. So they were meeting Monday through Friday from dusk till dawn practically, right? But suffice to say, we're a part-time legislature. And when June rolls around, which is when, and I'm sure if you're paying attention to the headlines, you'll start to see this about the budget getting ready to drop, the budget this, the budget that, because when the budget drops in June, that's when a lot of this action really starts to happen. Things start to move, things start to firm up into where they're going to be. And so in that, we knew that the governor had included this line item in his budget. And that's what ultimately ended up in there, which is really, really exciting. So, you'll see with a lot of these bills, there were a couple different, not so much different paths, but lots of tributaries that ran back into the same stream, right? We knew the end goal was we need to get this dedicated line item in the budget. That needs to happen. That can happen in a couple ways. Let's try them, right? Or if somebody else who's on the decision maker side of it says, hey, I want to add it in this way, fantastic. We just need it to happen, right? So ultimately, this was included in the budget, which if you're ever searching for the budget on the General Assembly website, it does have its own proper bill number, and all of the things that are contained within it are contained within the different articles. So the budget bill number this year was 6122, and housing was all encompassed within Article 14. Excuse me. And actually, one of my other buckets, I should have updated it because this other thing was also included in Article 14 in the budget. So we worked really hard to make sure that this got passed, and we'll talk about this in a couple slides, but having this production fund, it's $4 million, the mechanism, which is an increase in the real estate conveyance tax on the sale of commercial properties over $750,000 or $800,000. So it's going to generate about $4 million every year. And that's a fantastic start, but we need more. And we're going to have millions, hundreds of millions more flooding into the state from the American Rescue Plan Act, right? That can be used, millions of which can be leverage for housing to end homelessness and to house people. So we have this production fund now. That is an incredibly important first step. I mean, it's a historic thing, but we need to be filling that up, right? We need to see more of those ARPA monies going into affordable housing production and preservation. So, but now moving on to another bucket, expansion of permanent supportive housing and other supportive services. And I'm going to go backwards in this bucket here. So as you might remember from the top 3 priorities graph, one of the things that was listed was more supportive services and expanding permanent supportive housing. So, and this was something that was maybe not necessarily a show-stopping kinds of policy change, but this was a quiet change that is going to have a huge ripple effect of good in our community. And that was 1.5 million included in the EOHHS, which is the Executive Office of Health and Human Services budget, to fund a reimbursement rate increase for home stabilization services through Medicaid. So home stabilization services, again, pretty much what it sounds like. This is a Medicaid benefit. So Medicaid patients in Rhode Island can get help for housing stabilization through their Medicaid coverage. So these stabilization services cover pretty much everything, things like housing navigation, help with eviction prevention, excuse me, but they cover pretty much everything except the ability to pay rent, which we're working on that, right? Because ultimately we need things that help people we need resources that help people better afford their housing, right? That's preventative. That is so important, keeps people from experiencing homelessness. But this is something that's really important. And this is also a relatively brand new even, benefit through Medicaid that Rhode Island is offering. And we're one of the very first states to offer home stabilization services through Medicaid. But this increase in the reimbursement rate means that, so Medicaid policy gets very wonky very quickly, right? But the way it sort of works is you very rarely will see like, here's this new Medicaid bill on the federal level, I should say, that's being passed. The way Medicaid gets changed is mostly through waivers, waiver after waiver after waiver after waiver, which is one of the ways that home stabilization services like overall came to be. But essentially the organization or the provider on the ground runs the service, and then they bill Medicaid for reimbursement. Now that rate for different services is different, and those rates can change, right? I mean, for some pretty obvious practical reasons. I mean, what something was $20 in 1970 is not worth the same as $20 in 2010. And $20 in 2010 is not the same as $20 in 2021, right? So an increase in the rate reimbursement allows for more money to go back to the providers, which means that they have more capacity to be able to deliver better services in a more timely and efficient manner. And that matters, right? But the other piece that is really exciting, and to me was a huge showstopper of this legislative session, was the Rhode Island Pay for Success Act. That was H5788 S0371, was also ultimately included in the budget under Article 14. And this is the state's very first social impact bond project. The very, very first one. So Pay for Success, social impact bonds are also commonly known as Pay for Success, but this is the very, very first one. So we get to refer to it as just the Rhode Island Pay for Success project. We might need a new name because hopefully once there are more, hopefully there will be more, because this is a very exciting policy model that the state can implement to be able to impact lots of different and very knotty social problems. So what is a social impact bond project? Essentially, it's a public-private partnership. Government identifies a social challenge that they want to impact. In our case, we want to target chronic homelessness. We want to lower the rates, house Rhode Islanders who are experiencing chronic homelessness. And also we want to bring down the high utilization rates in the emergency shelter, emergency room and Medicaid, and correctional systems. So to do that, we're going to take 125 permanent supportive housing vouchers, which is, you will remember me talking about in the past slide. This is the most effective intervention to address chronic homelessness. 125 permanent supportive housing vouchers targeted to chronically homeless Rhode Islanders who are also the highest utilizers of emergency services. So folks who are in and out of prisons and jails, in and out of the emergency room, in and out of emergency shelter. Excuse me. The state is paying, we conducted a feasibility study in 2017. Many thanks to Dr. Eric Hirsch, who I believe was on the call and was a huge part in putting that together. But in that feasibility study, we found that the state was spending anywhere from $5.5 to $7.5 million in a calendar year delivering services that ultimately failed our neighbors who needed it the most, right? These are folks, because I mean, make no mistake, experiencing homelessness is traumatic. Not knowing where you're going to be able to safely sleep at night, not knowing where your next meal is coming from, not knowing where you'll be able to safely use the bathroom, or like not knowing if where you'll be able to have like a clean drink of water. I mean, that just even saying that out loud makes me feel stressed, like thinking about that, like considering that for myself, right? Like if you're going through, if that is your daily existence, that is hard, that is stressful, that is trauma, right? We need to give folks a real path to getting back to good. For this community of folks that are going to be part of the Pay for Success project, keys aren't enough. You can't take somebody, it's not fair to take someone who's been living outside, who's been sleeping in a tent for 5-10 years and say, all right, here's your house, here are your keys. I guess I'll see you around town and rent's due on the month. Good luck, don't fail. That's not fair. That's not feasible. That's not feasible. It's not realistic. I mean, there will be some people who have success, but why would we make it harder? We should make this path easy, because not only is it providing the strongest path possible to helping folks get back to where they want to be, stably housed, stability in all their aspects of their life. I mean, it's ultimately the cheaper thing to do, right? It costs, and this is just in general, it costs so much money to do the wrong thing. So it's saying $7.5 million every single year delivering failure. But through Pay for Success, instead of trying to pass the monies for these vouchers through the General Assembly and trying to win approval in that tough process, right? We contract with a private investor who puts down the initial capital. Now, mind you, the contract is held by an intermediary, so the state is not contracting directly with a private investor. But in that contract, they outline who's going to be the nonprofit provider. In this case, it's the Coalition to End Homelessness. What's the model going to be? Who's the target population? And then finally, what are the metrics of success? What is it that we want to see? And this is where Pay for Success gets its name, because if the intervention gets implemented and we see the success that we want to see, you know, and this is just an example. Say we say our metrics are 40% reduction in days incarcerated, 50% reduction in days in shelter, 15% reduction of Medicaid usage. Intervention runs, it's successful, we see those metrics achieved. The state then pays back the private investor using a portion of the savings accrued by running this program successfully, right? But say we only see a 25% reduction in days incarcerated and a 5% reduction in days spent in shelter, or a 10% reduction in Medicaid usage. Then it's the private investor who bears the brunt of that loss. I mean, we will achieve success here. I mean, the very fact that we're going to be able to take 125 people and get them into housing, that is success, right? That is help right there. That is important. Those are the types of steps that we need to be taking policy-wise in the state. But if this does not go the way that we want it to, again, this is not like other public-private partnerships. This isn't 38 studios. This isn't the tax TSAs where the taxpayer is bearing the brunt of this loss, right? It's all hitting the taxpayer coffers. It's, again, the private investors who are going to suffer the loss. This is the very, very first social impact bond project in the entire state of Rhode Island. This could allow us to cut the rate of chronic homelessness almost in half. Because like I said, on any given night, there are 357 people who are experiencing chronic homelessness. So 125 vouchers for this community of people. I mean, that is huge. That is huge. We'll be able to deliver this important path to stability, this important resource that's also going to save the state potentially millions, allow for greater collaboration between government and community partners, breaking down silos, because as we all know, Rhode Island is a very small state, but we tend to work like this, compartmentalized away from each other. This is a way to break that down, right? This is pretty monumental, and this is exciting, and this is a path I hope we continue to go forward on. So now I want to talk about busting barriers to accessing housing. And I think with that, I'm hoping our special guest has joined us. But look, it's so hard to see when I'm sharing my screen and I am when I'm sharing my screen and talking. But don't see her yet. So no worries. I think she'll be in here any second. So, but let me continue on with talking about these great bills that were in here. So one, a bill that we supported this year was a bill to seal eviction court filings when the verdicts found in favor of the tenant or the cases mediated through the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. This one is incredibly important because eviction is unquestionably a root cause of homelessness, right? Rhode Island has the highest eviction rate in New England. Providence's eviction rate is literally 3 times higher than that of Boston. And the pandemic has only made this worse. Oh, Rep. Williams, I see you. Hooray, you're here. Excellent, wonderful. So I'm going to just talk a little bit more about this eviction record bill, and then we are going to get into it about the successful fight to ban discrimination in housing Rhode Island based on source of income. So, but anyway, as I was saying about the eviction record bill, eviction is a root cause of homelessness in Rhode Island, and the pandemic has only made this worse. The pandemic has only made everything, all of these different problems, all of these cracks in our system, all of these inequalities and inequities worse, right? Excuse me. And we're seeing, I mean, there has been protection through a statewide moratorium, which ended last year in June. And there is the federal moratorium, which ends at the end of this month, excuse me. But while that moratorium has prevented evictions, most evictions for non-payment from going forward, that has not prevented landlords from being able to file eviction proceedings. And those eviction proceedings, those court filings, an eviction of any kind, that is a huge red flag to landlords when they're looking at tenants, at prospective tenants whom they're thinking of renting to, right? And these eviction court filings are publicly available on the Rhode Island Judiciary website. So it's basically like Google. So landlords will go onto this site, take the name of the person who they're thinking of renting that unit to, type it in, and if they see that record pop up, the vast majority of them are just like, nope, I can't. I don't want to deal with it. It's an eviction. I don't want to deal with it. But to add insult to injury, the record that pops up only shows that an eviction had been filed. It does not show the verdict. It doesn't show if the judge dismissed it. It doesn't show if this, it doesn't show what happened. It just says, hey, this was filed, right? And the fact that this is enough to destabilize a person's housing insecurity, that this is enough to cause them to experience homelessness, because once you have an eviction, it is so unbelievably difficult to find another rental, right? On top of the fact that we have our housing prices here in Rhode Island are outrageous, and they're only growing, due in huge part to our crisis level scarcity, right? But don't get it twisted. There is a market of landlords who have units that they will rent to people who have evictions. But I mean, not to speak from pure anecdotal experience, but are those apartments always the nicest? Or are those apartments that are in places where, let's just say, if you take Providence, for example, and you have a map that shows where the properties with the highest levels of lead and asbestos in, excuse me, and I mean, with poor health outcomes overall and like poor quality of life and all of these, all of these terrible challenges and barriers for folks. You take that map and then you lay on top of it the old redlining map, which isn't really that old. Redlining is still, I mean, arose by any other name, right? That type of discrimination is still alive and well, although it is illegal, right? But it's like they click into each other. It's like plugging a socket into a plug into a socket, right? So we need to keep people from falling into this cycle. You get an eviction, then you're just looking at, all right, who's going to take me? What's cheapest? I just need to get myself and my family a roof over our heads. I just need to do this. And then the income and the cost of housing grows further apart. And then that person says, hey, landlord, I need you, my water is broken. Black bile's coming out of my tap. I need you to fix it. I'm not going to pay my rent until you fix this. And then the landlord then drags them to eviction court, which is a story that a person did share to the coalition at one of our legal clinics. So if all of this is happening, and we know this is happening, we need a law that's going to prevent people from falling into this and from falling into this cycle of eviction, homelessness, because it just gets harder and harder and harder every time to come back, right? And this is the one bill here that has not yet been passed. So we passed everything else that I've just spoken about and I'm about to speak about with Chairwoman Williams, but we need your help for this one right here, 6464528, because this bill, so 6464 is an amended version of the bill, which was introduced at the beginning of session, and it contains an incredibly important amendment. Because as I was saying, the pandemic has exacerbated evictions, it has exacerbated homelessness, it's made everything worse, right? But we're seeing more and more people fall into evictions because of loss of income due to the pandemic. And even though folks are able, for many folks, not enough, right? It's still imperfect. We need to strengthen these protections and these resources, but people are being helped. Hundreds of people have received rental assistance through Rent Relief Rhode Island. And many of those people have an eviction filing now in their record. But if a family goes through the stress and the trauma and the uncertainty of an eviction, right, it should not further cause them harm. And when the whole point of emergency rental assistance is to stabilize someone's housing, then that's completely undermined, right? Without this important law. So this is one that we will be asking for your help with, that we're going to need you to advocate for. So stay tuned. But with that, I'm going to now turn it over to my special guest, our special guest today, Chairwoman Anastasia Williams. So one of the biggest bills that we fought for with our partners, with a lot of folks here in Rhode Island this year, was the bill to ban discrimination in housing based on lawful source of income. But I'm going to let Chairwoman Williams take it from here. But for those of you who do not know the estimable Chairwoman, she is the chair of the House Committee on Labor. She has served in the General Assembly since 1992, I believe. So she is one of the most senior folks who is serving in the chamber, and she is a true champion for ending homelessness and increasing affordable housing in this state. So Chairwoman Williams, thank you so very much for joining us. Why did you introduce this bill? And what does this bill do?
First of all, I want to say hello to everyone. Good afternoon. And to thank you, Christina, for the invitation to take part in this very important after the fact meeting. It's very necessary for us to not become complacent that we have accomplished something. So now we can just go and chillax a bit. The work has not at all over, and we need everyone on the grounds continuing in the pace that they have been for the past number of years. So I thank everybody for their effort, their input, and their being there, support. The reason I got into this particular piece of legislation is because of the many complaints and hardship that folks, individuals, as well as families were facing with regards to home ownership and or rental. The discrimination has been there for years. This is not anything new. And it's just convenient for some to say, well, the pandemic. For me, it's it ends up being that the pandemic is the perfect excuse to be used in the circumstances, any circumstances you want to put it in. But the reality for me is the pandemic, what it did was shed a floodlight, super beam on the already existing systemic racism and the hardships on every level that folks have been going through for decades. So it's not the pandemic's fault. It just put it out to the front so people could be honest, putting it right in their faces so people can be honest enough to say, whoa. It is true, it is real, but so I wanted to be able to continue to be part of the solution. And many people feel and believe just by them being there is part of the solution, but you need to be more than just there. You actually need to roll up the sleeves. You need to make a commitment and be genuinely sincere about it to fight the real good fight. Okay. So why couldn't I or shouldn't I have agreed to sponsor it? I live it, I see it, I've even experienced it. So it's definitely something I had to do. It wasn't a question, because the struggle is real, but for many, because it doesn't directly affect you, it's not as important, or it's not your problem. So it was something that it was one of my life's purpose. Now it's just a dent. It's just a drop in the bucket, because, people learn how to skin a cat, and they do that. It's not just 9 lives, it's 900,000 lives. And they come up with, all kinds of little schemes and scams, and they get it their way. But at least the message is out to those perpetrators to say that, at the end of the day, somebody's watching you. Somebody's taking notes.
Chairwoman, can I ask you then, you made a great point, like there's lots of ways to skin a cat, and I feel like advocacy is all about that. So could you tell us from your perspective, like why was advocacy so important here? And what's something that activists and advocates should remember and should keep in mind when they're trying to get bills passed or trying to, make change happen at the General Assembly? What would you tell folks?
I would tell them, first and foremost, communication. Whatever idea or intent you have, make sure that your table is big enough for everyone who has the same idea or intent or concern that you have are at the table, including those that you are supposed to be helping. And if your table is not the size to include everybody, my suggestion is to widen it, lengthen it, get those folks that you are trying to service on there, because they're the ones who can tell you the reality based on lived experiences. So, many times, we have people that are allies and they believe that their way is the way, but one size does not fit all. So my say to them is, first and foremost, thank you for considering, coming and help and be part of a solution. But I also want you to hear, not only listen, but hear what it is I am saying, because what I'm bringing to the table is something that you possibly have never experienced. So I need your undivided attention to what I have to say.
Amen. Well, thank you very much, Chairwoman. So I don't know if you can join us, but we're about to start talking about the next steps. The biggest one, which is, what are we going to do with all of these hundreds of millions of dollars that are coming into the state from the federal government, from the American Rescue Plan Act, to house folks and to help our community members. And to that, I have my wonderful coworker, Janine Costello, who is our new community organizer, is also going to be helping take us through these next steps. And see, I'm just going to share my screen one more.
So if I can say one thing with regards to what you're saying,
Please.
that you're going into is, first and foremost, what are we going to do with that money? I will say, spend it first and get it and spend it. But know that if you don't do it now, trust and believe it will be, if it's not already, assigned to those who feel and believe they're entitled to it. So get the moving, because it's going, and it's going fast.
Well, that sounds like a charge if I've ever heard, and we're taking up the call for sure. So share my screen again, and excuse me, y'all, I totally forgot how to get it back to full screen. ADD is the worst. The thing that says full screen mode. Here we are. Thankfully, it's helpful sometimes. So now, I'm going to have this up for reference, and these materials are all going to go out to folks after the event wraps up. But right here is a nice little handy chart. Shows you, this includes some CARES Act funds and some other stimulus funds that have passed, but it shows you right over here, ARP. What can it be used for? The money and the thing that it can be used for. And there are a bunch of different tranches or tranches that exist, or that's what they're called. But they're different troughs of money, different like buckets and lanes or what have you of money that are used for different things that all fall under the ARP umbrella. But practically all of them, and the one that I want us to pay particular attention to is ARP state and local government aid, which is just ARP replenishment of the coronavirus relief funds, right, which have been replenished in every single stimulus fund that is passed. But rehousing, yes. Homelessness diversion, yes. Homelessness prevention, yes. Eviction prevention, yes. Rental and utilities assistance, yes. Services like permanent supportive housing services, yes. Other financial assistance, yes. Yes, 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 yes. And this is the pot that we're getting. Thanks to our incredible Senator Jack Reed, right? There are small state minimums for coronavirus relief funds. And so we're getting, the rental assistance that we got the last time around, that $200 million came because of that small state minimum. So we're getting quite a lot of money that has quite a lot of flexibility. And as the rep said, we need to start demanding that our General Assembly use that to house people. We need to house people with ARPA. And this right here also is a little quick script that you could use to just, once you're done with this, really call your General Assembly member, go on the General Assembly website, their names and numbers are all there. Just pick dial and say this exactly, verbatim. This won't be the first or the last. Might be the first, but it certainly won't be the last time that you're going to be talking to them, especially if you want to get more engaged with us in our work. But this is the type of thing that it takes. How do bills become a law? Strategy, right? Tenacity, and being loud. All of those three things, right? But the number one thing is you need to have strategy, it needs to be loud. We need to just start, and we need to start planting seeds now. But we have a plan to cultivate those seeds. Janine, how can people help with this? How can people, shall we say, garden with us? How can people take action?
Right. Well, it's to be involved. If we want to bring people to the power, we do that through actions. In order to execute actions, we need to be engaged and involved. So in the following slide, I'll be discussing a few ways to get involved. We have a bucket of great events happening. We can join the conversation on ARPA spending in Rhode Island July 29th. There's a bit.ly link available, so you can register today. That's the most immediate action that you can do. Again, we can use that money for a load of things. So in order for the General Assembly to hear from voters and constituents as to where we want the money allocated, we need to be hearing from each other. We need to be communicating. We need to be collaborating. So the best way to do that is to join the conversation on ARPA spending in Rhode Island, July 29th. Another opportunity that I have available to speak about is to save the date for our upcoming policy bootcamp session, August 19th. Now, it may be a refresher for some folks. However, we will be discussing diverse and collaborative ways to be connected to legislators. So if you have anyone who wants to know a little bit more about legislative advocacy, this is the best event to go to so that we can cover that. And another opportunity that I have is to stay tuned for our 2022 policy priorities event happening in the fall of 2021. We want to hear from the community, and we want to hear from you specifically in regards to where our lens should be at the State House and what policies that we should be pushing for as priorities, right? And in order to stay informed and get the registration links to all of these great events that are happening, sign up for our newsletter at rihomeless.org. It is the most up-to-date way to get this information and get those links in your inboxes and just keep them on your radar. Another great event to keep on your radar is the Planning Summit for Pay for Success happening August 4th from 9 to 11 a.m. As Christina spoke about earlier in the presentation, we passed it, so what now? And in order to know the what now, there's an event that you can get educated and informed about. So another way to also get plugged into a lot of these great advocacy efforts is to become a legislative activist. We have a great bit.ly link available already at bit.ly/RIGA sign up. And what you can do there is you get plugged into rallies and lobby days that are going to be happening at the State House. And also you get connected to me because I'm also a new face in this field. And I would love to get coffee with each and every person that's interested in doing this work, so that I can, again, improve my skill sets as a community organizer and, organize the community more efficiently by knowing who wants to be involved and how. So again, great opportunities, great ways to be plugged in. Please consider them all. And to go back to ARPA, you can really help out most immediately with that campaign this summer and fall. So I highly encourage joining the conversation on ARPA spending that is happening in the next 2 weeks on July 29th.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Janine. This is really exciting. So Janine is, as I was saying, our new community organizer. And as you can see, we are hitting the ground running to do this work. It takes all of us working together, organizing together, strategizing together, fighting together, supporting one another to make these types of changes happen. So as you see, this is how we do our work. The policy and advocacy work at the coalition. We want to make systemic change happen when it comes to root causes of homelessness, right? We're fighting for policies that address root causes and realize systemic change that end and prevent homelessness in Rhode Island. But we're not doing that it's not just about Janine and I, right? We want y'all to be a part of this. And not only do we want you to come to the events, but also please tell us what are ways that would be helpful for you, what would be easy for you to do to get involved, right? What would make this more engaging, right? Please, y'all take Janine up on her offer to get coffee. I dropped her email in the chat. I also dropped my email if you're interested in the Pay for Success Planning Summit. But we want to hear from you, and not just you, but the folks that you are working with, the folks whom you're trying to help, the folks whom you're serving, people in your community. You are, for lack of a better word, you are a gatekeeper to your whole network. And this is Rhode Island, right? Where the personal and the political and the professional, no kidding, those words all start with P, right? We're all 1 degree of separation away from each other. And in organizing for justice and to end and prevent homelessness, that's a place where we can use that, we can make that our greatest strength. But come get engaged with us. We need your help to fight and win these types of victories that will make sure that nobody experiences homelessness, and every single Rhode Islander goes to sleep at night in a safe, secure place that they can, home that they can actually afford. And there is enormous opportunity to realize this change in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 months. Between now and January, which is in this time frame, the General Assembly is going to be dealing with and deciding ultimately how to spend ARPA funds. We need to be louder and bigger and more strategic than ever. But the strategery, I clearly grew up under the Bush administration, good Lord. But the strategy, I mean, we know what we know, right? Folks have already submitted some fantastic suggestions. I know a lot of people have been participating in the different feedback streams that are out in the community. I know the Rhode Island Foundation is soliciting feedback. I believe the governor is. There are lots of different places where people are making their voices heard. But we need to make sure that we're delivering that message of you need to house people with ARPA. We need to use this money to get to virtual zero when it comes to homelessness. We need to be saying that, all of us, practically all the time, to our legislators, right? Because they're ultimately the ones who will make the decision, but they're the ones who are there to represent us and represent the will of the people. So let's work together. Let's make these changes happen. Because as you've just seen, when we do that, we have success. And our success is not simply, hey, we got that shipment off, in like record time. Isn't that great? Like we did X, like we created X, Y, Z. We built this line of cars really fast, right? No, like when we have success, the whole community has success because we're dealing with issues that impact literally everybody, right? That is, not for nothing, but the issue of housing, we are incredibly strong when we all work together and organize together like this, because this is an issue that impacts all of us. There's an opportunity in that, right? Like reproductive justice is one of my most passionate issues, right? That's where my activism lies. But I know that not everybody I meet has a uterus, right? Everybody I meet needs housing, has housing, food, and water as their basic needs. This is something that literally impacts all of us. And since housing impacts all of us, homelessness impacts literally every single one of us. And there are still too many people who make decisions who think that people experience homelessness because of the bad choices that they make, which is not the case. People are experiencing homelessness because they're losing their homes, because their income no longer allows them to afford the rent, because they've lost their job or their hours got cut or the rent keeps going up, right? They're experiencing homelessness because they are, there's just no housing, right? So if they lose their home, there's no place to go. And we know that it is the same people who have been marginalized and oppressed. The same people whom it's happening to the worst are the same folks who have been suffering the most for decades, Black and Indigenous Rhode Islanders of color. Like, this is something that has its roots. It's not even a root, it's more like a rhizome, right? I remember this from my English senior year class, right? The rhizome doesn't grow down, it grows out, but it still forms a network. And it's still all connected. We are all connected through housing, through this need that we have. And homelessness is not something that happens to people as a result of bad choices that they make. It's the result of terrible choices that the system puts them into. And that is something that ultimately the system doesn't really care who you are or how hard you worked at your job, right? Or how much you saved or any of that. People are falling between the cracks. People are falling into homelessness. People are experiencing this. And those numbers are rising and rising and rising. So let's do something about it, right? And we can. So, but that's it. That's what we have for time. I hope that that was rousing and stirring for all of you. I just a little bit, but thank you very much to everybody for joining us for this great hour. Hope that you'll be reaching out and getting coffee with Janine, coming to the Pay for Success Planning Summit. We definitely want you to join us for the ARPA spending discussion. Stay tuned for the policy boot camp. I mean, we will teach everyone exactly how the sausage gets made to the most granular level. Trust me, it'll be a fun boot camp, which seems like a contradiction in terms. But anyway, continue fighting. Thank you very much for all of that, for all of the work that you do. It's a privilege and an honor to fight this fight with you. And LFG, right? Hasta la victoria. Well, be well and be safe all. Thank you, and we'll see you.